Correct. Next, who can tell me what Professor Beeman referred to as the heart and soul of the Constitution? Yes, in the back.
That would be Article 1, Section 8, which enumerates Congress's powers and is followed by the necessary and proper clause.
That's exactly right. Well, let's end our review with one last question. This is an important one. You may want to remember it for the essay portion of the exam. Can anyone tell me which Supreme Court case established the precedent regarding state taxing powers in relation to federal entities? Yes.
That was the case of McCulloch versus Maryland. James McCulloch took his argument all the way to the Supreme Court, and he believed the tax was unfair, which he refused to pay.
Oh, very good. Well, that wraps up our review. Thank you all for coming, and please let me know if you have any questions. I wish you well, and I'll see you tomorrow. Onward and upward.
Ugh, I'm never gonna pass this POL 105 exam. I just can't understand McCulloch v. Maryland, and Dr. Stratton said that would be a huge part of the test.
Did you say POL 105? I'm a tutor for that course. I can totally help you out with studying.
Really? That would be so amazing.
Yeah, of course. Did you say that McCulloch v. Maryland was giving you problems?
Yeah, I just can't understand it. I mean, I guess that's something to do with taxes, but I don't get why that's such a big deal. Everyone pays taxes. It's like a part of life. How did that turn into a Supreme Court case?
Well, the case does involve taxes, but there's a little bit more to it than just that. You have a lot of books here. Are any of these actually helping you?
No, not really. They all use big fancy words like prolixity and enumerated. I just can't get my head around it.
Yeah, that's fair. Tell you what, come with me. I think I might have something that'll help you be ready for the exam.
The answer key?
No, but after this, I don't think you'll be needing an answer key. Besides, the exam's all essay questions anyway.
Whoa! What just happened? Where are we? Who's that?
We're in Newburgh, New York. It's 1783, and that is George Washington. He's addressing some revolutionary soldiers who really can't be great, so you might not want to enter that.
And let me conjure you, in the name of our common country, as you value your own sacred honor, as you respect the rights of humanity, and as you regard the military and national character of America, in utmost horror and detestation of the man who wishes under any specious pretenses to overturn the liberties of our country and who wickedly attempts to open the floodgates of civil discord and deluge our sacred empire in blood.
So, what was that all about?
Well, after America became an independent nation, our first form of government was under the Articles of Confederation. Under this system, the federal government didn't have the power to regulate money transfers amongst the states. So as a result, Congress didn't have the power to pay the soldiers what they promised they would pay them. So Washington had to address them to avoid an armed rebellion against the government.
Wow, that's wild. But what does any of this have to do with McCulloch v. Maryland?
Well, it just goes to show that without any centralized power, the result is anarchy. Come on, I'll show you our next stop.
Whoa, where are we now?
We're in Maryland. It's 1818, just a year before the McCulloch decision was actually released.
How are we traveling through time?
The provost expanded the student tutoring budget this year, and this is one of the new perks. Look over there.
Look, it's just like Alexander Hamilton said in 1791. The federal government has sovereign power to use forceful means to achieve their end, provided those means are not immoral or unconstitutional.
But as Jefferson pointed out, creating a bank is not one of the powers the Constitution grants the federal government. It's an overreach of authority.
The Constitution has a necessary and proper clause, does it not? The meaning of the word necessary is broad. It covers a lot.
The Constitution also grants Congress the power to regulate commerce.
Regulating commerce and establishing a national bank are very different things. Congress should not have the ability to interfere in all internal matters of a state and levy national taxes on a state-constructed institution.
You're exactly right, Stephen. What's more, the Constitution grants only the meanings which are necessary, not just those that are proper. America could function without a national bank, so therefore it's not constitutional. Each state should be able to establish their own bank if they want.
That's what the 10th Amendment would support.
You would not be able to function a government properly with such a narrow-minded reading of congressional power. Chief Justice John Marshall has sided with Hamiltonians like us before, and I'm sure that he would do it again if the case ever arose before the court.
If that ever happened, I would hate Marshall more than I already do.
Wow, those were some knowledgeable and passionate citizens.
Yeah, when it comes to banks and taxes, it seems like everyone has something to say.
That's fair. They were using words like ends and means, necessary and proper. I remember reading stuff like that when I was studying for the case. Does Justice Marshall use that kind of language in his opinion?
He does indeed. So, now that we have the background to the case, finally meet the main characters of the case itself. Follow me.
Wow, this is it. This is the place where it happens. We finally get to meet the main characters. Oh, this is so exciting. This is awesome. This is like the best.
Yeah, so you know where we are then?
Yeah, I know where we are. Of course, we're in a bank?
Well, you're on the right track. You're just gonna need a little bit more info than that for your exam. But this is the Baltimore branch of the Federal Bank. It's 1818, and this is where James McCulloch is the manager. Maryland State Legislature just passed a law that's requiring all of the federal branches of the bank to pay taxes on all of the currency that they distribute.
Wow, that sounds intense. Okay, so the Maryland part of the case with the tax. I think I'm beginning to understand that. But one thing I can't figure out is, what even is a McCulloch?
This is ridiculous. This is the worst thing that has ever happened. Maryland, they can't even get their road.
That is McCulloch. He's the main character of our story. Come on, let's have a seat. Let's listen to why they're so upset.
This is ridiculous. Look at this crap. Maryland is demanding that we pay a tax on all of the federal currency that we distribute. You know how much money that is? Why do they even think that they can do this? We are a federal bank, not a freaking state one.
Well, there is an option to pay the annual $15,000 tax to avoid the stamp duty.
But that is ridiculous. That is a joke. It's an absolute joke. We'd still be paying a tax that we shouldn't pay as a branch of the federal bank.
Well, other states have passed taxes like these on the federal government.
That's right. Some states are limiting bank operations or trying to force them out altogether. A few states are requiring annual taxes of up to $60,000. That makes the $15,000 tax seem not so bad.
Not so bad? Not so bad? You gonna look at me and tell me that's not so bad? Any tax we pay here is wrong because the states cannot infringe on a federal entity like this. The only reason Maryland is doing this is because they think the Constitution is silent on the subject of a federal bank. They're trying to put a power move over on us because they don't think that this federal bank is covered within the Constitution.
Well, if it's a state tax, does it actually have any power over the federal bank? See, it's also confusing, the Constitution not being so specific.
God, I need a drink.
I think it's time we would all benefit from something a little bit more refreshing.
Okay, so this tax is clearly upsetting them. What can they do about it?
Well, realistically, not too much. The Constitution's a bit tricky in its wording, and it's very early on in the nation's history. So they could agree to pay the tax, they could petition the state, or they could just refuse to pay the tax and deal with whatever consequences followed it.
So what did they decide to do?
Not dealing with this crap anymore, okay? I'm not playing their game. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. I hate Maryland anyways. I'm just not doing it.
Wait, so you're not paying the tax?
I'm not paying the tax. No, I'm not paying the tax.
Positive.
What did I just say?
So how do we move forward from here? Follow me.
Well, that was intense.
Yeah, it's quite a situation they got themselves into.
Yeah. So you mentioned consequences that might happen if they didn't pay the tax. What ended up occurring?
Well, so McCulloch refused to pay the tax. He was arrested, refused to pay his fine, and then was sued by the state of Maryland.
Ouch.
Yeah, not exactly ideal. But he did get to make his voice heard in the Supreme Court.
Is that where we're going next?
I don't know. You tell me.
Wow, this is huge. This must be the Supreme Court.
You're exactly right. We're in the Supreme Court. It's February 22nd, 1819, and the court is about to hear the oral arguments for the McCulloch case.
Oh man, this is so exciting. I can't wait to see what happens.
On this day, February 22nd, 1819, the court will hear the oral arguments of McCulloch v. Maryland. On behalf of McCulloch, Mr. Pinckney, Mr. Webster, and Mr. Wirt.
I ascribe to the judgment that may be pronounced in this case a mighty, a gigantic influence that will travel down to the latest posterity and give shape and character to the destinies of this Republican empire.
Before the court today are two important questions. First, does the Constitution give Congress the power to create a national bank? If so, does Maryland have the power to tax the bank?
The power to create a national bank has been ratified by the voice of the people and sanctioned by precedent. A national bank has normative and long-standing significance.
30 years ago, Congress incorporated a national bank. All three branches of government consented to the power of Congress to create the bank. There is no plain or manifest reason that creating the bank violates the Constitution.
To satisfy the goals described in the Constitution's preamble, a corporation in the form of a bank is required.
In Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress clearly has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper to carry out its constitutional duties. A bank will help with revenue disbursement, currency regulation, and tax collection.
A power without the means to use it is a nullity. A national bank would also assist with the powers of waging war and trading with foreign countries.
Furthermore, the Constitution has its authority from the people and not the states. Congress is a competent judge of its own constitutional powers.
The right, then, to establish these branches is a necessary part of the means.
To list all of the steps needed to fulfill the powers of Congress is not feasible, as there are an immense variety of details. Not all powers need to be indispensably necessary. If this was the case, lighthouses, beacons, and buoys would not be required or would be illegal for the Interstate Commerce Act.
When looking at the second question, whether Maryland can tax the bank, the states must not be allowed this power. The power to tax involves, necessarily, the power to destroy. The United States cannot be subject to the power of the state governments.
Article 6 of the Constitution declares constitutional supremacy to federal laws. Allowing a state to tax a federal entity would deviate from this standard.
Whatever the United States have a right to do, the states have no right to undo. Judicial certainty is essential, and taxation of the states to a national bank is a needless risk.
The framers of the Constitution did not intend that the exercise of all of the powers of the national government would depend upon the discretion of the state governments.
The court must impose its authority and save the nation from the dangerous consequences of the states taxing the national bank.
And now, on behalf of Maryland, Mr. Hopkinson, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Martin.
Approval of the first bank should not guarantee approval of the second bank. Public banks in every state serve the same purpose as a national bank.
The Constitution is a compact between the states. All the powers which are not directly relinquished by it are reserved to the states. The national bank is no more than a commercial institution.
Branches are not necessary for any of the enumerated advantages. Congress should not be able to go beyond its specific powers from the Constitution.
In fact, the Constitution was only ratified under the premise that the federal government would be limited to its literal terms.
The framers of the Constitution intended to leave nothing for implication. If there is no specific outline for a national bank, then one should not be created.
The words necessary and proper of Article 1, Section 8 means indispensably requisite. A national bank is not an indispensable requisite for congressional power.
In regards to taxation, the right of taxing property is within the sovereignty of the state, and the national bank should not be exempt from this power.
If the federal government can set up unconsented banks in the states, what will stop the government from creating monopolies or corporations that will overrun the states?
The Federalist Papers affirm that the states can be co-equal with the federal government in matters of taxation.
Besides the taxation of imports and exports and a few other exceptions, the right of the states to tax is absolutely unlimited.
The argument that the power to tax is the power to destroy is fruitless, as there must be a mutual trust between the states and the federal government for a union to exist.
I emphatically declare that the states would not have accepted the Constitution if there was such an imposed limitation on their ability to tax.
Well, both sides had solid arguments. What happens next?
So the oral arguments lasted another several days, and Marshall would then ultimately deliver his opinion on March 6th, 1819.
We have to wait here for 2 weeks?
No, silly, we're time traveling. Check this out.
On this day, March 6, 1819, Chief Justice John Marshall will issue the unanimous opinion deciding the case of McCulloch v. Maryland.
The first question made in this case is, has Congress the power to incorporate a bank? Regardless of if the first bank existed, the Constitution would uphold the national bank. Maryland's argument that the Constitution is an agreement between sovereign and independent states should be dismissed. The government proceeds directly from the people and is ordained and established in their name. Further, if the Constitution listed all of the minor ingredients necessary for the execution of power, the Constitution would have the prolixity of a legal code and could scarcely be embraced by the human mind. We must never forget that it is a Constitution that we are expounding. The government must be entrusted with ample means for their execution of power. Congress is not empowered by it to make all laws which may have relation to the powers conferred on the government, but such only as may be necessary and proper for carrying them into execution. A thing may be necessary, very necessary, or absolutely or indispensably necessary. The necessary and proper clause is placed among the powers of Congress and not among their limitations. A limited interpretation of the word necessary would diminish the powers vested in the government. Let the end be legitimate. Let it be within the scope of the Constitution and all means which are to be appropriate, which are plainly adapted to the end, which are not prohibited, but consist with the letter and spirit of the Constitution. The act to incorporate the Bank of the United States is a law made in pursuance of the Constitution and is part of the supreme law of the land. Having decided the constitutionality of the bank, may the state of Maryland tax that branch. The power to tax involves the power to destroy. If the states may tax one instrument employed by the government in the execution of its power, they may tax any and every other instrument. The American people did not design to make their government dependent on the states. We are unanimously of the opinion that the law passed by the legislature of Maryland imposing a tax on the Bank of the United States is unconstitutional and void.
Well, that's the end of the case. You ready to head home?
I don't know, do we have to? The 1800s are pretty cool.
Well, I mean, that's up to you, but they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have...
Let's go back. Okay, so the Supreme Court decided in favor of McCulloch that the tax on the bank was unconstitutional. That's because states, like Maryland, do not have the power to tax a federal entity. Justice Marshall also said that Congress does indeed have the power to establish a national bank, even though the Constitution does not explicitly give it that power. This is because Congress gets implied powers from the necessary and proper clause,
which is found in
Article 1, Section 8, the heart and soul of the Constitution.
That's exactly right. You know your stuff. Are you feeling ready for this exam?
As ready as I'll ever be. Oh, hey guys. Are you studying for the POL 105 exam?
Yep, how do you feel about it?
Pretty good, I think.
Nice. I feel okay about it. I'm hoping I remember all my quotes. I know how much Dr. Stratton really loves quotations on the essays. Hey, you're the POL 105 tutor, right?
I am. Do you guys have any questions about the exam?
Well, kind of. I was wondering what happened after McCulloch v. Maryland. Is it still an important case today? What were some of the repercussions of it all?
I read that immediately after the decision came out, President Andrew Jackson made a huge deal out of it and said it was a terrible case. He was worried that the central bank would make it easier for the rich to get richer at the expense of those who already were short on money. He thought the bank would be a terrible idea, terrible for the common people of society.
Wow, it's crazy to think that a national bank and national taxes were so controversial back then. Nowadays, there's banks everywhere, and taxes feel like a part of life.
And there were even other precedents that were set by this case. Do any of you know what that would be?
Well, it was during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson that the Federal Reserve was created, essentially becoming the national bank that Alexander Hamilton envisioned.
Right again. I think you all really know your stuff. Dr. Stratton is going to be so proud. But in the meantime, I have to head out and do some more outlines. But best of luck to all of you tomorrow.